let's talk about putting our stories together. So it's Saturday, on the way to practice. I noticed yesterday when I was playing with the video editing that I don't talk loud enough and it kind of fades out to the engine noises. So I'm going to try to talk a little bit louder, but I might forget. So apologies up front. Second bit of housekeeping is I do not have the only way to write a story, but I have a way that works for me. So there's your little non-lawyer bit of lawyering. So storytelling and putting your story together. Again, this is kind of another Twitter feed inspiration. Basically a comment on how much work is going to go into a story. Working on your story, producing your story, putting your pieces and parts together. This might stray down the heresy path of plotters versus architect, plotters versus pantser storytelling methods, and that's fine. I don't really care whose heresy I upset. This is what works for me. So basically how I start at the end, because any good journey, you need to know where you're going. All the things that happen in between are the fun pieces on the journey that we're going to be playing with to make it interesting. So let's dive down the boring exposition road where I tell you what you need to think and see and feel and all that stuff that everybody hates to read. Went to the grocery store. Boring. Second bite at that apple. So I woke up absolutely starving. I needed to get myself something to eat. It was horrible. I had this huge debate going on in my head which way we were going to go. And finally, I decided I wanted to get myself some oatmeal. So I had to figure out what we had to do next. And you can see how this is going to go. We can narrate the story. As boring as going to the grocery store for oatmeal is, now we understand we've got a character with motivation. We're telling the story, and in the process, we have the goal. Our goal is to get to the grocery store to get ourselves some oatmeal. We've begun the story with our motivation, and we're plodding along through the story towards the end goal of getting to the grocery store to buy ourselves our oatmeal for breakfast. Boring breakfast, boring story, but all the pieces and parts are there, as opposed to, yeah, I went to the store for oatmeal. There's a big difference. So when you're putting your story together, the fastest way to get lost is to not know where you're going. Try it sometime. Get in your car, turn on the ignition, pick a direction, and try and figure out if you're going to end up someplace without wasting an entire tank of gas. I think I'm going to get smushed by a truck. Okay. Try and figure out if you're going to wind up someplace you want to be before you burn an entire tank of gas, not knowing where you're going. It ain't going to happen. So if you know where you're going, just like you need your characters to know where they're going, your characters need to be relatable. They need that goal, they need that motivation, they need all those pieces and parts that make a good normal story told. So if you start with the end state, everything in between is just a string of short stories strung together like a string of necklaced pearls. And if you go back and look at your classic literature, my favorite is Alexander Dumas with The Count of Monte Cristo. The book's like 900 pages long. every single chapter has some piece, some part, some motivation, some clue on the eventual destination and revelation of who our count is. And we don't know who he is, because he kind of disappears and you run into a whole bunch of different people. And I'm not going to spoil it, but the Count of Monte Cristo, every single chapter reveals new aspects on the mystery to figuring out who the Count of Monte Cristo actually is and who all these characters actually are. And there's multiple characters that when you read, if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss the clues, because every single chapter has a clue that tells you something important about these characters. And the chapters are strung together in such a way that those short story chapters that reveal some piece, some part, some clue ultimately take us to the end state of the final confrontation and resolution of the book, 900 pages later. So, the other day, I nattered on about something like 3.5 million words worth of stories that are so bad they're never going to see the light of day. Yeah, that file's sitting in the computer. Actually, it's backed up in multiple places, which you should always do, by the way. So, 3.5 million words worth of stories that I've just kind of babbled and dabbled and played with. And the reason why most of those stories are so bad is because I didn't know where the hell they needed to go. I reached a point in these books, these stories, these collections of words, where I was 30, 50, 75, 100,000 words down the road. And I realized, I don't know where the hell I am in this story. What the hell am I talking about? And the character's directionless. It's the motivation is lost. We don't know where we're going. We don't have a proper development of a villain and a conflict. So, when you're creating your storytelling, the fastest way to get lost is to not know where you're going. Just think of it like getting in your damn car. And I already gave that example, so I don't want to retread it again, but just pull it back up into memory. When you're playing with your story, big old speed trap up here. When you're playing with your story and your character gets lost because your character doesn't know where they're going, it's gonna feel bad. It's gonna feel confused and tangled and twisted, and somebody had an accident at the toll. They ran out of gas at the toll. So there's your little sidebar for the day. So if you don't understand where your character is going to end up, your character's not going to end up there. Not by purpose. You know, pick that whole circle with 360 degrees, pick a direction, and you got 1 in 360 degree chance of going in the right direction. Well, if your character's making a bunch of decisions, not having any guidance, not having any motivation, you've lost the ring of truth to your story. That's what happened to me in all these crappy little stories that I was writing and outlining and developing and putting together. Was the story at some point stopped ringing true because the character didn't make sense. And you kind of have to work through your first million words worth of stuff before you really start getting a feel for that. But on the way to putting those lessons into your squishy little brains, like I had to do, you're going to realize that you can write 15,000 words in a day, which I have done. You can write 15,000 words in a day words on the page. And at the end of the day, if you have completed that monumental task of putting 15,000 words into your story, by the way, your brain is going to feel squishy, like you're a freaking clam that's been hammered on by a sledgehammer for an afternoon. You're going to feel like chewed on rubber band or bubble gum. But you're going to feel exhausted at the end of that day. If those words don't take you in the right direction, they're lost. That's time wasted. And what'll happen is you put that monumental effort in day after day after day after day. And you're having those 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 word days. And you're banging out this story, and you get to the end of 30 days and you realize, I don't like these characters. I don't like where they're going. I don't like what's happening here. I don't know where I am. This is confusing, stupid, and I don't like it. And you're going to have the predictable letdown of, oh my God, this story sucks. Congratulations, here's your next 100,000 words going into the dead story pile. That's not a fun place to be. It's discouraging. It's frustrating. And then it's even worse when you go back and you're like, I have to get this done. And then you have to go back and delete that shit, because now it's no longer in your record. Now, that's a conversation for a different day, is how to store and record your stories and stuff. But never, ever, 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 ever allow your stories to build on the same document day after day, because storage is cheap. You can put the entire Library of Congress on one CD. You can put hundreds of CDs worth of information into a modern hard drive. Graphic and video take up a lot of space, but text documents do not. Here's your sidebar that I need to cover for a later day, later conversation, but always, always, always save your documents based on the day. Every single day. Year, 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 year. Month, month. Day, day. Name of the story. The number of times that I have saved my ass from almost losing my Amazon author KDP publisher account, because when we were transferring stories for legal issues after my dad died, I had to transfer the stories under my own name because we were closing the business that my dad owned. So when I was transferring those stories, I got a plagiarism hit and almost lost my KDP account. So hope that alarm didn't disrupt the video. So that was a serious scare, because once they ban you and all of your work that you have ever produced. Do not get banned. Do not do stupids, because you will hate the results. Anyway, so when you're telling your story, the adventures that people have in between on that hero's journey are the fun part that you need to tell. Nobody cares about the Death Star blowing up at the end of... What are you doing, buddy? Sorry, Houston is still a full contact sport for driving, and there are a bunch of dum-dums out here. So nobody cares that the Death Star blew up at the end of Star Wars. Excuse me. What people do care about is that the bad things happened and they led up to, and it was that adventure between the two droids dropping onto the desert planet, and then ultimately the end state goal of defeating the Empire and saving the rebellion. There's your hero's journey. The fun wasn't in the Death Star blowing up. The fun was in the journey. So if you look at Star Wars as a hero's journey or classic hero's journey, you're starting out with a young dumb kid who's all idealistic, and then he has to grow and develop and acquire the skills to go out and do this and that. And that leads to the next part of the whole storytelling thing, is that one of the most irritating things that a storyteller can do is create kind of like that what is it, the Deus Machina, the act of God, where suddenly the story is resolved through no real reason of the character's development. Like some magical power suddenly manifests in the very last 15 seconds and saves the galaxy. Or my very favorite, from a book that shall not be named, that I read multiple books of, and the series of like 5 or 7 books ended with basically the murderous, ravening, genetically engineered death machines that have just ripped apart an imperial. It was a different series, but a different empire's battle group. One of these things landed on a battle group and ripped it to pieces, killing the entire battleship. And then the main character literally looks at these things, an entire vault of these awakening death machines, and their heads explode. And that was the end of the book. New power, no reason to win, at a glance. Literally, he wins. Presses the I win button and wins. It's like, don't do that. Don't do that. Make your rules, train your character, let them experience life as you would, and then you've got a believable story. What do you know? So your characters need to do things in the order that makes sense for them to do it. So we'll go back to Star Wars. Luke said and proved that he could drive around and fly and do things on multiple occasions in that original Star Wars movie, long before he got dropped in the cockpit of that fighter and went up there against the Death Star. He said it on Tatooine. He said it when he was talking to Biggs in the extended edition, which got cut in the main. But basically, he and Biggs were having a conversation about flying. That got cut. Then they had a conversation about, I can fly us to Alderaan. Just get me a ship in the bar. When he was haggling with Han Solo. Then, more so than a single character, when they were getting ready to put Luke into the cockpit of a fighter to go and attack the Death Star, he had another character in the story vouch for his skills. So, while we may not have seen Luke doing much flying, during the interactions, the young character states multiple times, I can do this, why are you holding me back? Which is a typical teenage thing to say. Then he turns around and his buddy's like, yeah, Luke's a really good pilot, put him in a fighter with me. So Wedge speaks up, Luke flies with him and saves all their bacon. You've had a series of events throughout the story and that hero's journey that have taught, shown, demonstrated all of the skills that Luke would need. Another aspect of that, when Luke was training with the lightsaber, with the blast shield down on his face so he couldn't see the little floaty ball thingy that was shooting lasers at his butt. With that blast shield down, Luke couldn't see, but he was reaching out and feeling the force and doing all that kind of fancy stuff like that. That sets the tone for later when he reaches out, touches the force, and guides the torpedoes into the airlock of the Death Star. So, when you're telling your story, all you have to do, the fastest and easiest way I've found to go from the beginning where your character is weak, disoriented, lost, trying to find his way, whatever, through the end state, I write down my end state, where I want my character, where I want my story to end. Then I write down the beginning. Then I outline point A all the way through point whatever. And that outline is basically a chapter. Each chapter that I put in becomes a prompt. Each prompt gives me a reminder to teach my character some skill. Each section of that story relates and bundles certain skills and certain experiences within that chapter so that your character can grow and develop and do what he's supposed to be doing. If you can explain multiple skills that your character is learning along the way, when it's time for your character to do something that, that looks like a whole sign sitting in the road. So, when you have your character who is learning skills or demonstrating skills all the way through your story, you've now set the table for your character to use those skills. So, let's go all the way back to the end state again. What skills is my character going to need to reach this end state, to fight this villain, to defeat this environmental hazard, to upset the zombie horde's hive so that you can survive your upcoming Halloween horror story, whatever. You have to have the skill of swinging a sledgehammer to break the zombie hive. You have to have the skill of using matches and how to make a Molotov cocktail to splatter the zombie hive so that the thing doesn't regenerate for Halloween purposes, not for education or any other kind of anarchist kind of way. Shh, don't do that kind of stuff. So, if you're going to be having your character using a Molotov cocktail to burn down a zombie hive at the end of your Halloween adventure, your character damn well needs to know how to make a Molotov cocktail. So there's 1,000 ways that you can introduce that knowledge. They can see it, they can read it, they can have somebody teach it to them and explain it to them. And the methods are going to vary as greatly as your story. Now, zombies are the undead trope of this season. Zombies and skeletons and bats and lions and tigers and bears, no minds. So, if the zombies in your story are susceptible to fire because their skin is dry and they're all disease-ridden and blah, 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 blah. And the only way to get rid of disease-ridden corpses is fire. And people figure that out. And people are putting the rounds through the head of the zombies to break the nervous systems and whatever. The bodies fall and everybody's burning the zombies. It stands to reason during your zombie story at some point that some smart character is going to mentor your character towards the end state of burning down the zombie hive, where that skill of creating that Molotov cocktail style weapon has been taught, has been imparted. And if you can take the end state of the story, and these are the skills my character needs at the end, okay, great, cool, we can do this. Now, you can go to those chapters that you've sprinkled throughout, and you can add or remove or adjust the positioning of chapters to teach those skills. So when you're telling your story, and you have the journey in mind, where each chapter is that pearl along the string of pearls configuration, and you're teaching your character new skills during the story, during your adventure, those new skills are cropping up. Oh, the perito. Big old German Shepherd poking his head out of a car in front of me. So, if you're teaching your character the necessary skills in order to defeat the end state all the way through your story, every single word, every single chapter of your teaching and training your character on your hero's journey is going to naturally tell your story. Now, you don't get lost. You can do whatever the hell you want. And you don't have to strictly outline every section, every sentence, every segment of your story. I don't. I just put a prompt knowing that, hey, I need to hit these high points. I need to teach my character how to strike a fire on his own. I need to teach my character how to turn mud into iron so he can begin crafting weapons in an environment. And what will happen is you'll have your character, your office-bound character. You might come up with something weird like, oh, he watches that Primitive Technologies guy on YouTube. Now all of a sudden, your character is exposed to those skills during the storytelling because he's watching a video about that in the beginning, because you wrote those skills down at the end of your book. My character's going to need this, he's going to need this, he's going to need this, and he's going to need this. He needs to know how to build a house in the wild. He needs to know how to craft iron from ferrous iron deposits in rivers. He needs to know how to make those bricks and make those roofs and make the proper house, make a better house than anybody else in the community, in the primitive community. He needs to know how to craft that ferrous iron bacterial mud into steel, into iron. He needs to understand how to turn that iron into a weapon. During that story, where your character is overcoming the primitive technology, overcoming that primitive environment, if he starts as a fan of that content, you can introduce that in a conversation with somebody else, which is what I did in the story I was fiddling around with the other day. So when your character's buddy walks in and makes fun of him for watching the doofy videos of whatever, you can take that as an incident of learning. Now all of a sudden, that conversation can illustrate and guide through the process. Now all of a sudden, people are going to understand that we've already had this conversation. This is how the character was introduced. He's a nerd who likes the primitive technology kind of channels. He likes to watch the Filipino guys out at the freaking jungle digging themselves a pool. So now he's going to know how those skills work because he's going to have been exposed through it. And you can pull up those skills and you can illustrate those skills. The same way you can have that grizzled old anarchist or that grizzled old like camping instructor, or that grizzled old retired soldier who knows all kinds of mayhem because, you know, their career. They just explain how to do something to your character, and now all of a sudden your character knows how to burn down that zombie hive. So if you can string your story together with the destination in mind, taking that destination and then back planning, these are the things that I need at the end. And you can take those skills and drop them like little Easter eggs throughout your story. You can create a coherent story from here to here, and then you don't necessarily have to run in a straight line. You can twist and turn that string of pearls around and make a beautiful, amazing journey that you're going to take your visiting reader along. And then, boom, at the end, all the skills needed are accounted for. Everything's believable. You've encountered and overcome obstacles. There's your hero's journey. And you do that without getting lost in the process. You don't have to plot every single point of your story. You do need to explain the things your characters are going to do on the way to the final destination that only you know in the story. So storytelling's not hard. You just have to keep yourself like you're planning like a trip to the grocery store. It's that simple. If you can set that end state goal of I need flour, milk, eggs from the grocery store, and you can go to that position, that end state in your story, you can tell a story about that because everybody loves cookies. And if you can tell a story about how you're going to make the greatest cookies in the world and your end state is going to the store for that chapter, you can take that same storytelling process and then each chapter becomes its individual own story that all leads in that kind of Alexander Dumas string of pearls along the way. So that's how I tell stories and produce huge word counts that just stagger people when I say them. Because I know where it's going. I've got the images in my head. And as long as I'm tying those skills together, my biggest struggle is keeping those skills in order before I've written them down. So like right now, the story that I'm fiddling with, I'm in the process of getting those skills bound together because this main character is going to need to build his primitive village. So I have that list of skills in my head that I need to write down and put into a logical sequential progress as he's traveling through the world. So that's the biggest obstacle that I have to overcome right now. But once I get those prompts in, it's just a matter of 3,000, 4,000 words a day, 3,000, 4,000 words per chapter. In 15 days, I'm done. So you can create that 5,000 words per day fairly easily. Because if you've got those images in your head of those skills and those pieces and parts that need to get you from point A to point B in your story, and you can describe those images and describe those activities, each image that I have in my head is typically worth 1,000 words. So if I can prompt myself per chapter with basically 5 prompts that are going to pull images of my story into my head, I just have to describe those images. And then the chapters flow, the words flow, the chapters flow, and then I string the chapters together. And as long as I know I'm going from point A to point B, I just have to keep the chapters in order. So that's basically how I tell a story. That's how I don't waste words. And that's how I can produce as much content as I do. So a 4,000 word per day is not hard. A lot of days I'll produce in excess of 5,000 words when I'm producing fiction. And it's just a matter of sitting down and stringing the words together and doing it in a logical order. Anyway, we'll call it a day for now. It's time to go in and choke people.